Hello listeners, Mark here with our third My Rugby League Story, and the first from Down Under, and you might be pleased to know you're getting another voice in your ears this time too. If you haven't already, please go back to our other recent shorts. First my own personal story of rugby league fandom, and then we heard from Mark Butler about being a rugby league fan in North Wales. This time though, it's Parramatta Eels fan David Hunter. David properly got on board with SLP in 2020 and became a regular contributor with comments on the NRL action and the Super League too. He even started up his own podcast, but we'll let David tell you about that. Here he is.
Hello, my name's David. Regular listeners to the pod might know me as DVDHNTR, after I put my Twitter handle instead of my name in the comments in the Google form. I want to thank Mark for allowing me to talk, and all of you for listening. As you'll notice, I have a very Australian accent because I am an Australian. I love the English Super League, but obviously an Australian, my first love was the ARL, the NRL, and the Parramatta Eels. So I'm going to just talk about Parramatta first, and then I'm going to talk about my English Super League team when that comes around. Unlike all the people, I didn't really get to choose my team. I had to be a Parramatta fan. My father was a Parramatta fan. My grandfather played for them in third grade. I basically grew up only knowing Parramatta. I did for a few days try to be a Cronulla fan and a Canterbury fan, and they got shot down pretty quickly. What I remember from Parramatta is growing up, when I was about 6 years old, they won the premiership. I didn't remember it too well, but from that point on, Parramatta was a bit of a basket case club. And in a way, it sort of shaped my fandom of Parramatta. In the 90s, they were one of the poorer teams in the ARL, New South Wales Rugby League at the time. They always struggled, but I always enjoyed going to the games. I'd go and watch the under-20s, I'd go and watch the reserve grade, I'd go and watch the first grade. I think basically we went to go watch under-20s and reserve grade because it was some chance of us winning a game. We finished second last 2 years in a row, and only for the fact that there was a team called the Gold Coast Chargers, Gold Coast Giants, I'm not sure what they were called at the time, was only the reason why we were saved. One of my earliest memories of going to a Parramatta game at Parramatta Stadium was we used to get dropped off by my mum, and we would get out of Parramatta Stadium at the end of the game. We'd walk down to, it was out the front of a dentist's, and I would fold my hat into a triangle shape and pretend that I was playing the game and pretend that I just scored the winning try. I was 10, so that's fair enough, but realistically, I just always wanted to play for Parramatta. I never really got a chance to. I was never really athletic enough, but I always loved the club. And then Super League came around in Australia, and I became a teenager and I drifted away slightly, but then I came back right in time for them to lose a bunch of premierships, to lose a bunch of preliminary finals, and make myself feel worse about it again. Like I said, in the 90s, I remember coming up and watching teams that had guys with names that no one would even know, you know, guys like Gavin Kadanak and Danny Krinkovic and, you know, Michael Erickson. I always loved Michael Erickson, the bald-headed winger. Scored one of the most fantastic tries I've ever seen in my life, where in a reserve grade game he broke down the right-hand touch line, came about 2 metres away from scoring, got up, played the ball, ran right around, all the way around to the left wing and scored in the left corner. And I've never seen anyone player do that in any game before or after that. But obviously never really a success in first grade, so that was a shame. Like I said, through the late 90s they were a successful team, but they didn't win, and they still haven't won. They haven't won since I was 6 years old, and I'll still love this club till the day I die, but geez, they test me sometimes. So I suppose that's my rugby league, that's my Parramatta, my Australian team. Talking about the Super League actually came on late night on Channel 9 over here, one of our normal broadcasters, our free-to-air broadcasters in, I believe it was the early 2000s. I used to tape it on the recorder, watch it the next day. It was on, at 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that. I really enjoyed the games and I used to watch them. And, when you start watching, I had no historical links to any teams. Obviously, teams with blue and gold like Parramatta were going to be right up on my list. But for some reason, I started watching and I saw this guy called Lee Briers. And I don't know what it was about him, but I just liked him. I liked the way he played. I actually thought to myself, what if Parramatta signed him? He could come over and he could get us a premiership. He just seemed to be able to do things that other players weren't doing. And he played for Warrington, and I went, they're blue and gold, sort of close enough to it. And I really like this guy, so I'm going to be a Warrington fan. And then I promptly found out that Warrington, much like my beloved Parramatta Eels, were a team that would get so close and then just fail at the final hurdle. So I'm not even sure if that may be why I chose them. I obviously looked into it and I knew the history. There's another team in blue and gold, or similar blue and gold and amber and blue, called Leeds. And I could have been a Leeds fan, but they were too successful. I didn't want a team that had already won or was on their way to victory. I wanted someone that would win. When they won, it would be something special. And that's what I'm looking for with Warrington. When, eventually it'll be our year, I want it to be something special. And I know that's a joke amongst a lot of Super League clubs. It's always Warrington's year. Over here in Australia, feels like it's always Parramatta's year too. So there was that synergy. It just felt right. Just another story. It's not so much on Warrington, but I wanted to share one of the early broadcasts that I would watch. One of the early times I was watching when I was on Channel 9 and I was watching the Sky feed, there was a commentary. It was basically a game of commentary and it had Brian Carney on it. And I was watching it one day and my wife was sitting next to me. We were watching it together. And for some reason, he was the sideline guy. I'm not sure what year this was, but he was the guy on the sideline. And someone had injured their arm. And he promptly said, "He's got no arm." And then it went silent for about 5 seconds. And he responded back with, "Well, he does have an arm. He just doesn't know how to use it." And my wife and I use that all the time. It's like a quote we use. And no one knows what the hell we're talking about. I don't even know what game it is. But every so often, someone will just turn to each other and someone will just say to each other, "He's got no arm. He has got an arm. He just doesn't know how to use it." And I don't think my wife's laughed so hard. And I don't think she's enjoyed a game of football as much as when we watched that and we made fun of it the whole time. And I love Brian Carney. He's great and obviously much more polished than he was back then. But every time I see Brian Carney, I just think, he's got no arm. He has got an arm, he just doesn't know how to use it. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope that I've given you some enjoyment. I hope I've given you some insight into my fandom of Parramatta and of Warrington. If anyone wants to discuss some very unusual players in Parramatta's 90s history, I'm more than willing to do that with you. I do have a podcast. I'm going to plug it. Thanks to Mark. Hopefully you don't cut this part out, Mark, but Mark is actually going to be a guest in an upcoming pod of mine for Hypothetic RL. And I hope you guys do listen and you enjoy that one. I hope you listen to my podcast, Alternative Histories. There's not a lot of English content, but I am trying to put more in there. Obviously, like I said, I know about the game from the 80s. I know some of the teams. I know a bit about the history. I know a lot about the clubs that folded. I was very interested in a lot of that. Did a lot of research into it. But basically, I only really started watching it week in, week out in the early 2000s. If you have events from the English game, even if it's really old events, and you want to let me know about something that's happened that you might have wanted it to be a different way, let me know. Let me know through Mark if you like. But I just want to say thank you again to Mark, and thank you everyone for listening, and I hope that you have a great day. Bye.
Good stuff. Thanks, David, for sharing his story. He's a good guy. He really likes to talk rugby league, David. So great to have him on board there. A big one for Lee Breers fans too. I mean, how does everyone else think the king of the drop goal would have fared in the NRL? Let us know, or maybe it's a topic for Hypothetic RL. You can find David's podcast on Twitter at Hypothetic RL. It's spelled HYPERTHETIC. As David likes to stretch the hypothetical beyond its normal logical conclusion, hence the hyper rather than hypo. Just be warned though, if you do agree to go on David's show and he tells you that you don't need to do any prep, he may then expect you to have the full 125-year history of rugby league in 2 different cities that you don't live in up your sleeve. So just a warning. And that's a tease. My episode of Hypothetic RL podcast that David mentions talks about the 2015 £1 million game and the hypothetic influence of one swing of Danny Addy's boot in that first £1 million game between Bradford and Wakefield. But thanks for everyone for listening to this SLP short. I hope you enjoyed David's story. If you want to share your rugby league story with us, then get in touch, superleaguepod@gmail.com. If, like David, you want to record your own story, that's great. If, like Mark before, you want to write it down for us to read out, that's great too. Also, if you wanted to do it as a conversation with us, that works too. We'll just need to set up a time and organise we mostly record over Skype, but I'm sure we can try and figure out one of these other newfangled ways of recording video calls. Until you hear from us again, though, please do stay safe and look after yourselves and your loved ones. And then we can look forward to a time where we can all meet up in person, and that seems more poignant with this episode coming out a year to the weekend since our last SLP meet-up, which was at the opening round doubleheader for the 2020 season. So yeah, that in-person meet-up can't come soon enough, and we'll hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.